recordings. So I'll share the screen. And there we go. Right. So Bordeaux Masterclass. This is obviously, I just need to make sure my screen's back around the right way. And there we go. That's it. There we go. Right. So Bordeaux Masterclass. So we're going tonight to talk about obviously Bordeaux, and we're going to use it as a catalyst to, I guess, introduce our wines. But we form a fairly decent bridge between the wines of France and the wines of Australia. And we're going to go into a lot of that. We're going to talk about the history of Bordeaux. We could talk about a bit about the cultural, the food aspects. Because what I find is that wine is unnecessarily complicated, but when you actually put it in context of these cultural, historical, food related, things start to make really, really good sense. If you want to put yourselves on mute just while I'm talking, come off it just in case there's any background noise or anything like that. But as I said, please jump in. This is not a lecture. It's a masterclass. So Bordeaux, I like to talk about it. It's probably one of the two main wine regions, still wine regions of France, being Burgundy and Bordeaux. You've got your seconds, I think personally, after that being Rhone, Loire, and you've naturally got your sparkling region of Champagne. It's a really interesting dichotomy, and I do a lot of Burgundy chats naturally. I'll explain why. We're a Burgundian family, but and Burgundy is much more classically French, I think, because of its location, because of its heritage and history, whereas Bordeaux is much more complicated in terms of its history, much more international influence, and a lot of that has really built up its wines, its food, but in particular, the reputation of it as a wine region and where it now sort of sits in the world. The styles of wines that are produced these days all correlate back to a number of big historical signposts, and which will start to sort of unravel, unwrap, pull apart the threads of. We won't get too granular unless you'd like to. So Bordeaux Masterclass on 6th of October, 2021, near the end of lockdown. A little bit about us, for those who don't know, we are a small family winery. Literally, my photo there is my sister on the left, my parents, myself, one of my daughters, Annabelle, and Megan, my smarter half. We do have a small on-site team who are effectively second family to us, and we've been running at Rylstone since 1998. So when we're talking Rylstone, we're talking it's a small town near Mudgee, Bathurst, and Orange, in that area of the world. Beautiful countryside, old farming towns, quite striking geography, a lot of mountains and cliffs and rivers and forests. When we talk French style and terroir, I'll come back to it, but it's very much central to who we are. Our family originates in Burgundy. I know that a lot of people probably are contemplating what's a tire company doing in the wine industry. I do like to say that every vintage is a good vintage, but that's Goodyear. But the name itself actually translates from Old French, or Burgundian in some respects, from a beautiful hideaway or sanctuary. And we think that's probably a reasonably good description as well of what we've built in our little valley just near Rylstone. Definitely has that sort of sense of discovery as you drive down a 3-kilometre driveway through a lot of vines to the cellar door. We have a reasonably good pedigree, although we don't tend to chase awards. The ones we've entered, we've done reasonably well. We've won third best Cabernet in the world, won the Cool Climate Trophy for Australia, and in 2018 we won best overall wine in Australia out of 10,000 wines judged. So reasonable number of accolades, but as I said, we are an on-premise winery, and that's probably where and why there's not an enormous awareness of who we are, because our direct-to-customer is most accessed at the cellar door and our wine club, and then through the wine dinners that I do. So other than that, we really rely on wine lists. We're in a lot of good hotels, a lot of good bars, a lot of good restaurants, and you'll increasingly see us. So this has been a great way, I think, of engaging with people, providing a little bit more of the background and depth, because let's be frank, Rylstone had no wine before we arrived there, and people are trying to get their heads around what we're doing, so what it all means. when we talk a little bit about French style and what French style means, and this incorporates the way the French themselves, I believe, produce wine, and it really sort of fits the way that we like to think of ourselves as the way we want to produce wine. And we're really talking about one, food matching, being on premise, we're a restaurant chef, sommelier wine. A lot of my chats, a lot of my discussions, I use food and rather than flavor. I find it much more informative when you know what a wine goes with, rather than trying to say, can I really detect red fruits or forest floor or mushrooms in this wine? We can leave that up to you. It's very subjective. But really what we're trying to do is get balance. We're trying to maintain the wine that it has a beautiful acidity, balance between acid and flavor, good ripe tannins, just wines that will sit well with a lot of different courses. We make 16 different wines, so we can match pretty much any dish out there. And that's why I normally do about 2 wine dinners a week out of lockdown. And I've been doing 2 during lockdown with a number of great restaurants around Sydney in particular. We're also talking about age-worthy styles. So there's a lot of commercial wine out there that is designed to be great young. Let's be frank, 95% of wine in Australia is drunk within 24 hours of purchase. So there's not a lot of brownie points for having wines that are going to be great in 5 or 10 years' time. But to me, and to the way that we like to make our wine, the real litmus test of great wine is their ability to be great beyond 10 years to 20 years, maybe to 30 years. And that comes about by being structured and having that good backbone, maybe with some good tannin, not overripe tannin, not overly flavoursome, but just the right balance between tannin and acid with the flavour in the middle, and just carries it forward majestically for a long time. That's what we're trying to do. Means we do get sometimes punished on being a little bit younger when our wines are a little bit younger, but great wines, great palates. You just got to work on the different acid levels for different food groups, and that gives you a good guide. We're also, as I said, terroir focused. So we have a very special terroir. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight, and it's very much the dominant terroir that you see throughout France as well, limestone base. And I guess being a vineyard focused winery that the French are all about, if you've dealt with their appellation systems in the past, you'll appreciate the fact that it's the vineyard that sets the pace and sets the quality standard, not the winemaker. There's no recognition actually of winemakers in France, except in the champagne industry, perhaps. That you get a lot of variation because you're not blending. Australian wineries and traditional Australian winemaking, we blend across vineyards. French wines tend to blend within a vineyard. Either they're a field blend of co-planted varieties, or they literally will blend together different varieties from different sections of their block. But what that means is that you get the vintage variation of the climate in particular of each vintage plays a large part of whether it's great or bad or terrible, or more importantly, wines that you reposition and the varieties that you focus on when the climate changes. And we have that advantage here in Australia, which the French don't. The appellation system is a little too constrained. We have a bit more flexibility and freedom of action. I guess being vineyard producers, being focused in the vineyard, we are very much about the minimum of intervention in the winery. We don't go so far as to say natural winemaking. I find that term has now become a marketing moniker. I think that effectively natural winemaking has its place if the fruit is perfect. The problem for natural winemaking is that winemaking in itself exacerbates any underlying faults in the fruit. So if you're not there to control them in the winery, they get out of control. And that's why a lot of natural wines are spoiled. But if the fruit's perfect, fine, don't touch it. Treat it like a natural wine. So we reserve the right to intervene. The last thing we want to do is sell you good, bad wine at a high price. But we want to also make sure that we keep that connection between the vineyard and the winery is very much a heavy hammer, whereas terroir is very much a whisper when it comes to wines. And in terms of, I guess, the vineyard, one of the big things is not just sustainability. It's not just trying to keep the status quo for us. It's about improvement, regeneration. There is a clear correlation between the quality of the vineyard and which creates the quality of the fruit, which creates the quality of the wine. So, whether you're a mercantilist or an idealist, being regenerative, improving it, especially for wine in particular. And there are enormous advantages, especially if you intend to make wines that are going to age well. So understanding a little bit about what the French approach is and that sort of around that style. I've done these now enough times to know. Let's open some wine. Obviously, have a drink. So tonight, as I go through the story, I will stop, have a segue, talk about one of the wines, and then continue on. And the first wine, if you like, I know there depends how much you want to drink tonight. Good thing is that there's a couple more nights ahead. So the bottles, if you have a glass, they'll last a day or two, maybe 2 or 3 days. If you've got Coravin, they'll last your picnic on the weekend. But feel free to open them or just follow along and remember this. I will send the presentation around to you guys if you would like. And as I've recorded it, I'm happy to share it with you as well if you want to revisit it. The first point is bedding Bordeaux in its ancient history. So pre-BC, so pre-1 AD or pre-Roman, this was Basque countryside. So this middle picture here is in effect where the Basques are now constrained to, as you're aware, probably northern Spain, a little bit of southwest France. It's called Pays de Basque in France. But back 2,000 years ago, the Basques extended beyond Bordeaux, and as you can see all the way across to Andorra, quite a substantial amount of territory they controlled. The Basques are pre-Celt. They're not exactly sure what their true heritage is because their language is unrelated to any other European language or Western European language. And they're obviously been fiercely independent in various regions. But Bordeaux being within that means that its history, its original influence. When the Romans arrived, they were talking to Basques, and the Romans brought viticulture to Bordeaux in 60 AD. So by which stage, as you can see, they introduced it to the Basques. Now the Basques, to understand them, besides obviously their fierce independence, is their incredible reputation for being sailors. Most of Spain's explorers, the great sailors of the Spanish empires, were Basques, interestingly enough. And the way they developed this capability, it's a bit like, I guess, the Cornish for the English. It's why pirates say "ar," because that's yes in Cornish. Effectively, if you go to Cornwall, they all speak for "ar." That's where the pirates get it from. So the Basques were Spain's sailors, and they developed this capability from being fishermen. And they were extraordinarily successful fishermen. They used to chase the cod across the Atlantic. There are stories that back well before 1000 BC that they were fishing off Canada, off the Grand Banks. And they used to fish in these you can see this yellow boat in the middle here, which it looks like a surf lifesaving boat. It's probably, in some regards, that's why surf lifesaving boats are designed that way. They're able to cut through the swells. If you've ever been in this area, there's pretty big swells on the shoreline. And they would literally sail across or row across the Atlantic in them. And as they were fishing for these cod, they'd then bring them back to market, and they became very much in demand. There was a very strong market, and they used to sell them Ireland, Scotland, England, France, around Spain, these cod. This predated refrigeration. So the way that you preserved your fish or food back in those days was by using enormous quantities of salt. So effectively, these boats were full of salt. And as they caught the fish, they would bury the fish in the salt to preserve them, to take them back to market. And so as you can see here, a little bit more on a chef sort of culinary approach, but this naturally became a staple feature of their own cuisine, a very salt-laden diet, very salty fish, and also a lot of salt in general. So what does this mean, and how does this equate with wine? Is if you're looking at one, FMCG always seems to nail the trends and the tastes. They spend an enormous amount of money working these things out. One of the most popular chip flavors in the world is salt and vinegar. So that's because salt's natural twin is acid. So when you're looking at salt and vinegar chips, they're playing on this connection, which has been in the wine world for extraordinary lengths of time. Highly salty food goes with very acidic wine. So the aim was, and what they produced was, the Basques used to rely on fairly acidic wine. So Bordeaux's white wines in particular have a very high level of acidity to them. And so appreciating where they come from, the influence on the cuisine, you start going, okay, I understand now why Semillon from Bordeaux tastes nothing like Semillon from the Hunter Valley. Now, it's amazing how many people don't realize Semillon's named after Saint-Emilion, which was the wine capital of Bordeaux. So Semillon, with a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, is called Bordeaux Blanc. It's Bordeaux white. And it's based around cooking, has a very elevated acid level, massive amounts of citrus, and those malic sort of compounds as well that you sort of see in a lot of the great Semillons. And interestingly enough, it's got a bit of a different reputation, a bit like Australian Hunter Valley Semillon. What you find is that hope you guys are you guys seeing my slide summary or the slide show?
As far as we can tell, it looks like the slides to me.
Okay,
slideshow. Yeah, slideshow.
Just the slides. Okay, so I looked over and went, oh, there's on my things showing a lot more. I must be on the other screen. Anyway, the point is that so these wines evolved to match this salty cuisine, so they had a higher acid load. So the area that Semillon is most pronounced and planted in Bordeaux is actually not near Saint-Emilion. So Saint-Emilion is east of Bordeaux, is along this sort of south bend below Semillon, below Bordeaux, and you can see it down as it follows around the Garonne River. And this is the Garonne River, or Gironde up here, Garonne, and it's an area called Graves. Well, Grave means gravel, so it gives you a bit of an indication of where we'll go tonight. But it's sort of broken into two components. One, the northern end with Pessac-Léonac. That's the most expensive of the Semillons. You probably see there a bottle of Chateau Le Michon Haut-Brion, incredibly famous wine. One of the 4 oldest vineyards or crus in Bordeaux. Expensive. This is Semillon. And it's interesting, it was the wine of choice of Thomas Jefferson, who used to order it by the truckload back in the 1700s. It's a phenomenally good wine. It's interesting the way that they make it. They make it nothing like a lot of the easy drinking styles. In terms of the way the Hunter Valley treats their Semillon, they treat like a VAT one. They're treating it on the same quality level of this. Very different climates, but both the outcomes you can see can produce these magnificent wines. To be frank, as a Burgundian family, we're a little surprised. We've been focused on Chardonnay being the greatest white variety. And when we produced this Semillon Sauvignon Blanc, it was more in response to the grapes that we'd planted. And obviously, as we see the quality starting to come through, we're like, wow, this actually has a lot more complexity and there's a lot more ability for us to extend its quality level should we choose. And it's, when you look at it, makes sense. That one on, in the Hunter Valley side, or Brion on the Bordeaux side, two from some of the world's best wines. So interesting little breakdown is obviously, so the Pessac-Léonac is the premium area. Then you've got General Grave being this sort of lighter orange area. And then you've got this sort of yellowy, I'm not great with colors, yellowy area right down here. And what you see there is you see Sauternes and Barsac, and we'll talk a little bit about them, but that's a sweet style of Semillon. So there we said, we've already indicated. So you got your VAT one, which is, interestingly enough, Australia's, I guess, equivalent, one of our pinnacle Semillons, treated much like Haut-Brion. It uses oak and has age, and it's delayed release obviously improves it quite dramatically. Good acid there, but it's interesting. I would expect with, they've picked it a little bit young, like with 11.5% to keep that acid load up. And that's a function of the climate. It's very hot in the Hunter Valley, especially relative to Bordeaux. It's not a Bordeaux Blanc. It's its own wine, and it's one of the great discoveries we can do in Australia. Classic dry white. This is much more classic Bordeaux Blanc style. So Margaret River really pitches itself as the Bordeaux of Australia. It's on the coast. It gets the great winds coming off the Indian Ocean and the drying winds that keep the disease out. Similar longitude or temperature or degree days, so they say, produces magnificent wine. So Vaz Felix is always a benchmark winery, my estimation over there. Quite a lot of Sauv Blanc in there too, though. They really are looking for that partnership that comes about a little bit more of the vagrancy of the Sauvignon Blanc with the rigor of the Semillon playing together. But, once again, looking for a higher acid load, interestingly enough. You've got your Haut-Brion. You can see there, interestingly, is that the alcohol level is higher, yet the acid still remains there, which is, it's colder climate wine. So they're able to hold it out in the vineyard a little bit longer and still retain the acid. So you're really picking not so much an alcohol, to be honest. You pick on flavor, which is a little bit indeterminate. It's flavorsome or it's not flavorsome. You're not going to be sitting there going, I can detect the passion fruit. You're looking for the chewiness, looking for the tannins. You're looking for the way that it fits in your palate. But you're also picking to acid. It's a really big benchmark for it. So this 3.2 seems to be about the benchmark. So for us, the wine you're having now is obviously reasonably low alcohol. It was a cooler year, even doubly cooler year. The acid was around there. As you can see, TA is really high. We don't amend our acid, so very acidic wine, which is great. It's perfect. This is the wine style that you want to have, in my estimation, with that salt and pepper squid, with that fatty, maybe I'm trying to think some of the salty seafoods out there. I guess we can all do the math, but it's really eats it up into that sort of tier. Interestingly as well, acid goes really well with breaking down fats and the like. So it has that ability also to maybe pitch it with a little bit of a fattier fish as well. So I find in particular, you'll find with your reds, and we'll see it with Cabernet later on, amazingly great at breaking down Tataki and Carpaccio and things like that as well, because of the acid to fat. So it's acid and salt, great. Acid and fat are great too. But just good to sort of show a little bit of comparison where we sit. As I've indicated before, interestingly, there's a real feature here is the Garonne River, which is south of Bordeaux, that brings a sea fog down in the mornings. So they have this pea soup sea fog that wends its way down. And all these vineyards up here are a little bit further back. They're a little bit more elevated. So the rest of Grave is just a little bit too far from the river, a little bit too elevated. The sea fogs don't get to its vineyards in the morning. But they do, and they settle very strongly over Sauterne and Barsac. And what that does, and what it does in the morning, a lot of people wondering what botrytis and how it operates is it effectively induces botrytis in a sweet rot fashion. So to understand botrytis, I guess you got to take it back 1480 something. The Ottoman Empire was obviously invading to overrun Vienna, and in their flight path was the little village of Tokai in Hungary, and the monks left their monastery. And the monks, a lot of history were affected the vignerons. They left. Obviously, when you're doing a war, you do it in the summer months. So effectively, the fruit's ripening. They had to flee the monastery. They returned to it later on, and by the time they returned, the fruit had started to rot. And they, being desperate, obviously alcoholics, they looked in their cellars, saw no wine left, and looked in the vines and saw this rotting fruit with this Botrytis sinister on it. This, as you can see it over here on the left. No, look, it's going to be a long winter. We need alcohol. So they got out there, picked this disgusting fruit. Like, it looks really disgusting when you make wine. It's claggy, white. It's not very nice. You have to be desperate to want to discover this. And then that process, as they made the wine from it, they discovered sweet wine. Because what botrytis does is it feasts on the moisture around or within the fruit. So a bit like cordial, it's effectively reducted wine juice, or cognac to some extent, which is reductive wine. But in this is grape juice, reducted grape juice. So what it does is it takes the sugar level to a ridiculous level. The yeast can't handle that level of sugar. So the yeast can only get to about 15%. So once the sugar level goes above that target range, the yeast die, and then what's left is what creates the sweetness level. So these botrytis concentrates, puts the sugar levels ridiculously high. Net result is you're left with all the sugar left in the wine after the yeast have fermented it, and they had sweet wine. So these wines, this town was called Tokai, and Tokai is, unfortunately, we haven't paid a lot of attention to it in the last 50 years when it disappeared behind the Iron Curtain. But this was the wine that if you were the Holy Roman Emperor, this was your wine. If you were, if you were the Politburo in Moscow, that was their wine. They used to take it all. Problem was that they actually starved the region of funds, and it almost fell apart. Hugh Johnson and a couple of other big English wine merchants have been in there reinvigorating it. But what happened was obviously they discovered it, and they made this amazing wine. The Holy Roman Emperor is going, "This is amazing. It's all for me." And so the technique translated and moved across to Sauterne. And why it's settled here is it goes back to that fog story. So you need the rot to happen at a steady pace. You don't want it to happen too fast, because if it happens too fast, there's no flavor. The sugars doesn't get there. You just have this rotten fruit with, with a low alcohol, too low alcohol range, no flavor associated with it. So a very hot, humid environment is actually negative. You'd think naturally great for mold, probably it's just too good. Whereas the sea fog, because it's morning fog only, botrytis develops in the morning and then it stops and it's gone in the afternoon. So the fruit has time to dry, the fruit has time to ripen further, and it just happens as stop, start, which is actually a very good indicator of a lot of great wine. A lot of it's stop, start. And so from that, you've obviously been able to develop Chateau d'Yquem, which is probably one of the most famous sweet wines in the world. Extraordinarily expensive. You want to look for the years it's been declassified if you want value for money. Every now and then there's a year that isn't good enough for Chateau d'Yquem, and it sells for about a tenth the price. And it's called Sauterne. It's the same bottle, same cap, same label, just says Sauterne on it. And it's worth getting because you get value for money. And the reason I talk this up is we produce botrytis wines. We produce a botrytis Semillon, just like Sauterne. We produce a botrytis Viognier, which is just like a Condrieu. It's a Guigal. We don't need to go into it tonight, but this was the wine that we won best wine in Australia. We had no intention of ever making a sweet wine. We get a morning fog off the Cudgegong River, and it's pea soup. You can't see through it. You get lost, and it's gone by late morning. Same as Sauterne. It's just uncanny. We used to fight it, and we used to spray heavily to try and stop it. We gave up because it was costing us money and it was hurting the vineyard soils, and we just let it rip. And we had some pretty good discoveries. So obviously winning a lot of trophies from it. So just one of those pure, a bit like the monks of Tokai, pure random set of circumstances created us as a great sweet wine producer. We came here to be Burgundy. We're doing Bordeaux tonight, and we're doing sweet wine. It's all a bit uncanny. So anyway, but point is this is the feature for them. It's a feature for us too. Sea fog is the secret for gradual development of Semillon. Otherwise, Pessac, Léognan, and the like is where you get the rest of the Grave. But especially Pessac, Léognan, you get incredibly good, incredibly expensive Semillons. So enjoy that wine while you have it there. This is, I guess, a little bit of a slide, and it's probably more responsive to a lot of feedback when I talk to a lot of people. Is in Australia, as our wine knowledge has accelerated, we can sometimes, there's vestiges of, I think, of how we used to classify and qualify wine, and they're still holding on. I know a lot of people are moving beyond this, thank God, these days, but we've always, not always, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've started sort of saying if it's cool climate, it's good quality. If it's warm climate, it's bad quality. And it's sort of become it's a highly misleading statement. It's about varietal selection. And even still, the Hunter Valley, which is warm climate up here, and Bordeaux, which is cool, relatively cool climate, both producing Semillon, can't argue that Hunter Valley makes amazing Semillon. It's not always a great indicator even of the varieties, but classically it normally is. If you're wanting to make a Bordeaux variety or a Burgundy variety, you probably want to be a bit closer in temperature to it. The rationale behind it is that ripeness curves, so the ripening process of vines has evolved through grafting and natural selection over thousands of years to optimize in these environments which they operate in the old world. So it's great for picking the varieties. But if I was to pick cool climate, Grenache, Tempranillo, Touriga Nacional, Nero d'Avalo, the Southern Italian, the Spanish, the Portuguese, all these varieties that are becoming very trendy in Australia, and I think you'll see a lot more of them, they're not cool climate. If they're in cool climate, they'll be underripe, they'll be bitter and terrible wines. You need warm climate for them. They should be up Riverlands, Hunter, and the like. And even in Mudgee, which is interestingly quite warm, there's some great Spanish varieties being made now, and they're tasting really bloody good. Strongly recommend them. So that's that's the step one. Temperature, important, but not it's not the indicator of quality, to be honest. The way that I guess the French approach this difference of reviewing quality effectively via the prism of terroir through their appellation system. But we'll just talk a little bit about terroir first. Terroir is this confluence of climate, so cold, warm, great, but it's coastal or continental. So inland or coastal climates have a massive part to play. I guess topography. So as we said, Sauterne, down lower in the valley, near the River Fog. Burgundy, up in the slopes of the hills. All of these things have a large part to play, or on the micro level, below a stone fence that pulls cool air behind it. You can really get very micro on some of this stuff. Flora and fauna play a large part, quite a substantial part. One, your natural, your microbiome, and we'll talk quite a bit about that, is really incredibly critical for both the vineyard and the winery. And it's interesting, the characteristics within that play a large part to play, and we'll talk about how that operates in certain functions. But it's also about using nature to defend your vineyard. Vines are relatively robust, grapes are not. So vines can handle pretty much anything. It's the quality of the fruit that you're trying to deal with here. And that's really heavily driven by, the health of the vine. If you're using ladybirds and you're using lacewings to defend your vineyard rather than harsh sprays, you're keeping your soil microbiome intact, which is driving a lot more of your fruit. So this is all a bit of a function. There's a number of parts to play. Also, the wineries, interestingly, all have their own genetic signature of microbiome. You go into all the French wineries, you can actually DNA test all of their different microbiomes, and they're all very unique. Fascinating. It's actually being used as one way of trying to get around fraud in wine. Every wine has a DNA signature. So, you're not going to do it. You're not going to do that testing. Who was talking about testing costs before? Was it Kylie? Was it too expensive testing? Look, it's worth testing on. It's a couple of $1,000s, put it that way. So if you're going to buy a $20,000 bottle of Burgundy and you're not sure about its provenance, maybe getting a DNA test, not such a crazy idea. But I guess what it really stems down to as well is the big difference is Australian wines are based on a very different history. We started by the English, and now Bordeaux is a very large English component, but it's a trading component. The English in Australia, Busby in particular, with the Hunter Valley in 1840, he owned the land there. It wasn't, oh, wow, this land looks like Bordeaux. It's like, I own some land, I like wine, I'm going to plant grapes. That was the combination. From that, a region developed. The Germans they actually came down with quite a substantial terroir understanding, and you see it in some of the characteristics of the German areas of South Australia. The Italians, naturally, some of my favorite wines in the world are Italian wines. I would happily die in Piedmont, but they weren't the ones who came here to establish the wine industry. A lot of the Italians that came to Australia were here to build large fruit plantations. So they were chasing the big irrigated riverlands areas and the like to be mass scale, large scale producers. That's changing, might I add, but the history in terms of this real French approach, the French have been noticeably absent. That real single vineyard behavior you do see in Italy, Spain, the old world was absent. We weren't welcome here. We were at war with the English for most of Australia's early history. Trafalgar and Waterloo were very much, I think Waterloo was almost towards the end of convict transportation. So it's a different approach we come from. And the Australian approach was a lot more vineyards blending into big wines for export purposes. So you lost the vineyard personality, and the reputation was driven by the winemaker's skill to develop a consistent product that you didn't have to rearrange every year, that people were happy with. Whereas the French, it's all about the vineyard, so much so there's no even term for winemaker in French. Interestingly, the closest to probably an Australian winemaker will be a chef de cave in Champagne, because they are blending vineyards there together to get the non-vintage, Moets, Bollingers and the like. Even still, the premium of the Champagne world is still single vineyard growers. So that's I guess a little bit of introduction on that side. Where does it sort of come to? If we start unpacking a little bit for us and the way that we had to do it, there's a lot of history in France, and we'll go through it, that we can't replicate it in any shape, form, or another, in any speed. Sorry, but we can if we use science and a little bit more I guess, analysis, we can start appreciating and understanding what they've done and looking to replicate it and looking to understand it and appreciate it. I guess the big thing here is you've still got the same scale on the left as the condensed scale here, but you've noticed everything's concertinaed out now across. And you've developed, what you've noticed is one very glaring, obvious consistency of the French regions is they are all on an average region soil pH between about 7 and 8, and probably 8. And that's a really important feature. So when you think of Bordeaux and Burgundy, the enormous difference in wine qualities and styles between the two, not a lot of difference in pH, temperature, not a huge difference in pH. It's the coastal versus continental climate is the real driver of the varieties here. But you notice they're all fairly similar. And then you look at Australia's variety and versus, look, to be frank, this is not a discussion about how Australian wine is bad at all. It's the opposite, actually. Because of this diversity of terroir, we're discovering things with wines and doing things with wines that the old world can't do, won't do, and we're discovering some amazing things. But for us, being a French-style producer, being in that square was really important because that sets you on the pathway to follow their approach. So a bit about, I guess, the locations and how we come about this chart. So I'll start explaining how this comes together as we go along. The two important things to look at on this, these are all the vineyard regions, I guess, of France, the main ones, and the general plantings of the fruit. And you'll notice that they tend to hug these two approximate curves that are in purple. I just want you to look at that. Don't get confused. I'll come back to it shortly. But just this will all start becoming a little bit clearer as we go along. I'll explain these two stories. So Bordeaux, which is the south, the red zone, obviously off on the west coast, and the Gascons. So once again, the Gascons and the Gasconais, Basques. Bordeaux, I call it a Game of Thrones. This is a region effectively bathed in the blood of a lot of warfare that has created some of the greatest wines in the world. And it's become because of that. And it's caused a lot of that. A very wealthy area. If you've been to the southwest of France, you'll notice one thing. It's very wealthy. It's much wealthier in some respects these days, almost than a lot of the rest of France. And you notice in the towns around that area, very high tech, very modern. A lot of their tech businesses in particular are down this way. And Bordeaux, as you can see, is stunningly beautiful along the river. But once again, as it's indicated, it's a historical sort of, and this is where the Game of Thrones comes about. And this is what has effectively, obviously, we've started with the Romans and the Basques and the high salt content. We're now talking about, I guess, the more development of the modern appreciation of Bordeaux. And it all starts with this lady, a fiery redhead in the middle, called Eleanor of Aquitaine. And this area was called Aquitaine. For those, it's quite a substantial duchy. And this was back, I should actually always remember, it's about the 12th, 13th century, I think it was. And she was the only daughter of the Duke of Aquitaine. Now, this was an independent duchy. So they were not French control. They were not French kingdom. They were their own, effectively, state. They weren't a vassal to anyone. I think they vaguely swore some, alliance, allegiance with the King of France, but they were their own people. The Duke only had one daughter. Naturally, the French crown was like, aha, this is our way in. So they obviously convinced the Duke that they would raise Eleanor in Paris and they would educate her. While she was there, she was betrothed to the king's son, oldest son. And all was great, effectively. Great France and Aquitaine would be combined. Problem was the oldest son passed away. And the second son, Louis, was forced out of the seminary. He was studying to become a monk. And so he was particularly pious. He hadn't studied much else, to be honest. And he was like, well, you're now going to be the future king. So they transferred the betrothal of Eleanor from the oldest to Louis, the second son. Now, to understand and appreciate where Aquitaine sits, it sits right on the border with Spain. And right up until that era, you're talking around the Reconquista, but of large influence from the Muslim kingdom that was of Spain of those days was actually one of the most advanced areas of Europe. at the time. Incredible amounts of science, a large confluence of people traveling from all over the world, and it did influence Aquitaine. And Aquitaine was a very liberal society. They had female leaders. They had no problems with female leaders, and had very large, very, very colourful ceremonies, lots of parties, lots of dancing, very colourful gowns and the like. And then there's Louis VII, the future king, was being monk, and he was boring. That's in a nutshell. He was very boring, very pious, to the point where he's the one who joined one of the main crusades and helped set it up, and he took Eleanor along. And so this is when he turned of age, and they sort of tramped off to the Middle East, and they were successful. As they came back, she realized this guy was boring stiff, and she's like, I don't want to be married to this guy for the rest of my life. And she'd taken the eye and found a little bit of, interest in this guy called Henry, the Count of Anjou. And Anjou is on the Loire River in this sort of brown zone here in the middle. That was one of his countdoms. And they sort of fell in love. And she managed to convince the Pope to annul the marriage to Louis VII. He was allowed to keep their 2 daughters. She was free to marry Henry. Henry became a pretty big deal. He became Henry, the King of England. And so England, by that, acquired Aquitaine. It had Brittany. It had Normandy. So effectively, England had a third of France at the time. Obviously, Louis VII was pretty pissed off, and there started the 100-Year War, which was effectively a battle between the Angevins and I guess the people who thought they were French kings in England against the people in France who thought they didn't want someone in England who thought they were French ruling them, and that kicked it all off effectively. So with that, the English had Aquitaine. As you see here, at the start of the 100-Year War. So their daughters of Louis and Eleanor were Marie of Champagne, and which we're descended from. Obviously, the king quickly married her off to Champagne and Burgundy to try and get some allies in this war. The sons of Eleanor and King Henry of England were Richard the Lionheart and King John. And if you've watched Robin Hood, you'll appreciate the importance of those 2 characters. That's why I've got a bit of the funny Robin Hood here. But effectively, King John was Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham, or I think it was Snottingham in that movie. And that's what all sort of came about, and it evolved into full-blown warfare and Crécy, Agincourt with Henry V, and the end for the English-French was around with Joan of Arc. It was really at that point the English and the French became 2 different nations. Until then, they saw themselves as French, and they were fighting over the French crown. They all spoke French. King Richard the Lionheart didn't speak any English. He only spoke French. I think he only spent 200 days in his whole life in England, to give you an idea. But anyway, fairly important. But what it really meant was that this Aquitaine area was English land. And because of that, these vineyards down here were English vineyards for a long, long period of time, for many hundreds of years. So don't get too distracted. This goes back to those little purple swirls that we were talking about. And this is a geology map. So for the engineers on this call, I don't know if you're civils or mining or like, but don't focus too much on all the different colors, but appreciate the fact that there are 2 big things I've tried to draw out of this. One is the vineyard plantings, which I've circled and highlighted. And the other is these 2 things called a basin. And I've made it even more obvious for you by putting water in them. Naturally, the expectation is if you're looking at a basin, is to appreciate that a basin comes from having water in it. So unfortunately, there was a slide and another presentation that I brought across to this one, but effectively take this story back to Pangaea. So this is 150 to 200 million years ago, great supercontinent. And France was effectively the border between what was right in the middle of northwestern Pangaea. You had Northern American landmass and the Eurasian landmass combined together, and France was right there. And as they started to move apart, it formed a rift valley, and into that valley, the oceans, great oceans around it, rushed in, and they covered all the low areas of France. So the Aquitaine Basin and the Paris Basin. And that was the formation story. It's why I have a bit of Sam Neill there, era of velociraptors, if you need to remember it a little bit more effectively. Very important, this feature, because this really defines the French, that quadrant, that square, that high soil pH, because in shallow seas, especially of this era, because this continent where France was at that time was on the equator, so it was warmer. Warm seas created enormous populations of plankton within the sea, and that plankton, as it died, fell to the bottom of the sea, and it built up layers of chalk. So chalk is the descendant of plankton, or that type of microscopic or smaller sea life. You can see with that, Champagne was affected a little bit out into the basin, because along the coastlines you get shellfish and not plankton, and the shellfish, as they get compressed and build up, the quantities get compressed into limestone. And you can see here, that's a Burgundy vineyard there with a fossilized shell 400 kilometers from the coast. But effectively, all of those regions around the borders were the old coastlines. These are the old coastline deposits of those limestone, those shells, and Champagne was out here in the basin with the plankton. So why that's important is a basic 101 in gardening. Is limestone and chalk, like eggshells, is calcium carbonate, and it's an alkalizer. So if you're having an acidic stomach, what do? You go and get an Alka-Seltzer, which is an alkaline tablet, effectively, and sodium bicarbonate, and it will neutralize the acid. So you end up with this more alkaline soil. So the way that Australia's vineyards, so all those very acidic soils in Tasmania, and the reason why Australian soils are so acidic is because they're mainly in volcanic rock. Volcanic soils are quite acidic, and also rain is acidifying as well. We're very ancient soils. Rain lays down acid into the soil as well. So the way that they get around it, so they don't just accept. So here's a good thing to say. So probably should finish here is, if you've got tomatoes and they're struggling in your garden, go and get a bit of eggshells or a bit of ag lime, and you'll notice that they start to improve and start to grow a little bit better. But this is what drives this high pH. So as you can see, they're all on some mildly alkaline soil, but they're all on old plankton or old shellfish. Australian soils, as I said over here, are quite acidic. They don't accept that lying down. So what Australian vineyards do is you go and buy a hell of a lot of crushed lime, and you put it in a spreader, and you drive up and down your vineyard, and you dose the soils. So you're working from the top down. Problem is that washes away. So you have to constantly apply it. And it also, because it's top down, it doesn't always get to the optimal root depth of about 30 to 60 centimeters, where it's just that right temperature for a lot of the microorganisms to really be, heated up for your root zone and the like. And in this situation, whereas the French regions here, and you can see some of the Italian regions and the German-built Australian regions, the Barossa, Eden Valley, Clare, and the like, are all on limestone too. It comes from the subsurface up, and it happens by this swelling and shrinking of the rocks from frost-thaw cycles, especially cooler climate areas, exacerbated, shatters the rock, pushes it up into the soil. So it's very dominant. The whole soils have these very high alkalinity levels. That's sort of what this quadrant, this is how it's derived from. This is just a 101, long way of saying alkaline soils come from these regional areas in France. And what does that mean? Like, as I said, if you've got tomatoes and they're struggling, put a bit of ag lime on them, or eggshells or whatever it is, you'll notice they start performing better. And what you'll see here in the middle is that nutrients are more available at that slightly acidic to mildly alkaline, that sort of 6.5 to 7.5 pH. So the soils are able to deliver to the vines more nutrients. So by doing that process, all you're saying is that the soils are more efficient at doing what they at providing nutrients in this alkaline. You're pushing a marble, not a cube. That's what I'm sort of saying at the top left. So much the same way that all efficiency relates to, the economies, effectively less energy, less something like fuel efficiency, less fuel to get from A to B. This more efficient soil means you don't need as much soil to get the same nutrient level. The net result is that you have these much shallower soils. So those shallower soils, are really important, because this is where it all gets to. All this geology, all this chat, everything else gets down to the one section that shallow soils means the difference between a table grape on the left and a wine grape on the right. Table grapes on the left are full of moisture. They are refreshing. They're not particularly flavoursome. They're full of water. And that is provided by either a lot of irrigation or very deep soils, because soils are your moisture reservoir. So when it rains, you can soil moisture levels take off, and the deeper the soils, it means the more moisture that's available to the vine. So the net result is you end up with bigger bunches, more diluted flavors, great for refreshment. But in wine grapes, you want small bunches, small berries, intense flavor, a lot of sugar concentration, because that's what gets better wine. That's what gets you 15% or 13% or 12% or 11% alcohol levels. Also means you get more skin to juice. So there's not just concentration, it's proportional. And that's the difference. All it comes down to is limestone gives you the shallow soil, enables you to have shallow soils and ends up with smaller berries. Proof is always in the pudding. Some people just want to say it. This is one of the best vineyards in the world, Cremont Village, makes Louis Roederer Cristal, 50 centimetre soils straight into the chalk. Domaine Romani Conti, this is a 400 metre by 400 metre plot of land, tiny planting, mid-slope, where the erosion has taken most of the topsoil down into the valley floor. So there's just enough shallow soil there for the nutrients, for the efficiency to come with the vine health, but not enough soil for there to be too much water retained for the great, one of the greatest wine, the greatest wine in the world. Pretty shallow, pretty crummy soils at depth. So not a lot there. So all it is this holy grail. I sort of talk about it because it explains the French, the Bordeaux, everything comes back to this equation for the French. Effectively, limestone or from chalk gives that alkalinity, healthy vines, but don't need much soil, because that's all they need to get all the nutrients they need. That creates a situation where the grapes become water stressed, they become smaller, the wines become better. That's it, 101. It's not overly complicated. It feels overly complicated when you start it, but this is what it all just comes down to. So deep soils, I hear it every now and then. It's the same, that cold, warm climate. It's human psychology. It doesn't deserve a place in viticulture and in this regard. The only time deep soils work for viticulture is when they're very free flowing, like sandy or gravelly in particular, and the water can just runs and escapes away very quickly. But if you have deep clay soils, God help you, you'll have fairly flabby wines. So I'm talking about Merlot, the unloved variety. So I don't know if you've seen Sideways. Has anyone here seen Sideways? Yeah, they've got a great movies. It's like if you're a wine nut, it's like one of your favorite movies of all time, but you also hate it because it destroyed a variety out of hand. I don't know if you've seen the scene and they're outside. It's effectively, he's there quoted, I'm not drinking another fucking Merlot. If anyone brings one out, I'm leaving. And that quote alone destroyed Merlot sales by 40% in the United States. And the ripples went everywhere because Merlot, we don't, with the appellation rules and the EU, and we're not allowed to talk about French, we're not allowed to talk about our wines like the French. We're not allowed to use the old terminologies we had to use. So we had to start using the varieties. So what we used to call like Bordeaux blends in Australia, we had to start saying Merlot. And people didn't connect the two because you don't go to France and go, I want a Merlot. You go to France, you say, I want a Petrus. and they go, that's $6,000, thanks. You're just supposed to know it's 100% Merlot. Anyway, I do love the fact in the movie, there was the great inside joke was he says, I hate Merlot. But at the end, he's talking about his favorite wine of all time, and he's talking about the name of it. And this is what he's trying to play, the dichotomy of saying the variety versus saying the name. The name of the wine that he's raving about is 100% Merlot. So this is Merlot. It's obviously Pomerol. Petrus is your benchmark wine. Also Le Pin, let's be honest, it's all right. I don't know if anyone's got any of these, the ability to buy these wines. They're 100% Merlot. So there are, in terms of, I guess, where we fit. So sometimes you'll see with Petrus and Lepin, but especially around them, you'll see Merlot mixed in with maybe a bit of Cabernet, maybe a bit of Petit Verdot. It's to sort of blend out, some of the shortfalls of a vintage. So they don't engineer the wine in the winery; they'll blend it. They'll use a blending table, and they'll bring the juice into the wine. We are more confidently. So 2016 and before, I wasn't responsible for any of the wines. I drank a lot of them. We were much more conservative. We weren't really yet ready to go for a really healthful leather with our Merlots. 55% Merlot. It's about 30% Cabernet and probably 35% Cabernet, 10% Petit Verdot. And you can see 2018, which is an upcoming vintage. I opened it last week. It is magnificent. It's 75% Merlot. We're really starting to go, no, we don't care that people out there hate Merlot or think it's malign. You've got to appreciate the fact that if you hate Merlot, then you should be writing off Petrus. And I've never met anyone who hates Merlot, who knows their wine, who will write off Petrus. They just aren't appreciative of the fact that that's the dichotomy of France. They use the names of the wine or the vineyard. Australia, we have to use the name of the variety. So I love Merlot because to appreciate Merlot, one is from a terroir perspective. So looking at Petrus here. So Petrus, so it's different. So Burgundy, if you appreciate Burgundy, it's on the hills, the slopes, the good stuff's in the mid slopes, the best stuff's in the mid slopes, good stuff's above that and just below it, where the soil is still a bit shallow. The valley floor, where all the erosion's taken all the soil, deep soils, it's where the crap is. Don't touch it. Don't spend your money. It's overpriced, and you're just paying for marketing of the brand name. Better to buy Central Otago or Oregon Pinot any day of the week. Same so Pomerol is on the right bank, and I'll come back to where it all sort of sits. So this is just behind Bordeaux, and incredibly famous area of France. And what makes it special is it doesn't have the steep hills. It's much flatter vineyards. What it has is this. It's called Boutonniere. It's especially under Petrus, and it's an exclusive blue clay, that's blue because of the limestone in the soil. And what it does is it's only about a half a meter to a meter at depth below Petrus. So Petrus has it all, has all the soil. The other areas around it it's a bit different. It's not as blue. There's a bit more influence, but this is the best of the best. What it does is at the start of the season, it holds lots of moisture, which is great. You don't mind a lot of rainfall or wetness at the start of the season because it gets the vines going. There's no fruit development. It's the second half of the season the water becomes the issue. Once the grapes start to develop, that's where you need to start turning off the irrigation. It's where you need to start limiting the water. It's where we use things like regulated deficit irrigation. You start hearing about water stress. And what happens over the summer in Bordeaux is that Boutonniere, that layer that was wet at the start, great moisture retention, dries out and becomes thick and impermeable cement layer. And the white vines aren't able to access any more water except for what's in that top half meter to a meter. And you get the same experience. It restricts the grape development or size development, and you get more concentration, more flavor, or skin. They've effectively cornered the market in this little spot there, but it does extend out. But the most limestone, the most blue clay is just under them. So that's the one to enjoy just the moment. In terms of, I guess, the appreciation of Merlot, it really comes down to, I guess, an understanding. I'm just trying to make sure I don't sort of preempt my story of what we'll talk a little bit about later on. But from a food selection, so we talked about the whites developing thanks to the Basques. Merlot is the classic Bordeaux variety. It's been the variety that effectively they've been growing as a red variety since day dot in Bordeaux. And the reason why it's been so successful in classic sense in that era of Aquitaine, we're talking vineyards here that were owned by Richard the Lionheart, was because it fitted their other natural or cultural dish, which was it's called Pauillac lamb. I don't know if you've had the chance to have it. It's a 45-day aged lamb, so it's incredibly tender. It's probably too young, but what it's indicating is that you're not talking a very fatty meat. You're talking very tender meat. You're talking a meat that doesn't need the tannin. And when you're looking at Bordeaux and you're looking at Merlot and you're talking about the water retention, it's not just the dilution factor. It's also the fact that it's got thin skins. Once the grape is ripe and the skins are almost to harvest, too much water, they pop, they burst, and disease rushes in and you ruin your fruit. And so the thin skins, and we'll talk about the Cabernet, but one of the main sources of tannin is from the skin. So Merlot doesn't have very thick skins like Pinot Noir, and so it doesn't have that high tannin content. So you don't have that cat's tongue sort of ripping apart the proteins, the fats, and the like that you would. So it's much more designed. I think anything braised, baked, slow cooked. So I think of this as my Sunday roast variety. It's magical, absolutely beautiful, a really lovely, welcoming wine to drink, and sophisticated. You know, $6,000. Yeah, it's not coffee. It's not always quaffing wine, but it's got that level of structure as well. We've got some Cabernet in there because we were trying to bring a bit of the palate to the front as well. So Merlot is very much middle palate, a bit of Petit Verdot at the back. So Petit Verdot has very thick skins, so a lot of tannin, takes it to the back, and gives it grip in particular. Cabernet's got a lot of acid and tannin, but a lot of acid, so it's right at the front of the palate. Merlot, that warm, welcoming wine, right in the middle, and you get that full palate protection. I do, as I said, indicating we're moving towards a much more Merlot-dominated product because we make great Cabernets. Why have something competing with them? So how does that all sort of fit in, this sort of shallow soils, the alkalinity? You've seen the chart where we sit in it is sort of why at Rylstone. So a bit more of a background of the family. So our family started making wine in the Yarra Valley in 1970. My cousin Hugh is still making it there and in the Mornington Peninsula. We are Victorians. So we're Burgundians a long time ago. I was born in Victoria. I have an AFL team, not a rugby team. We are here in New South Wales because we were looking for this environment. We were chasing, obviously, those conditions, and what it served up to us. This is our vineyard here. To give you an idea of scale and dimensions, we're standing here to the other side and just over the other hill there. The vineyard is 1.5 kilometers wide, and from left to right is 600 meters. So it's sort of constrained. That's pretty much the dimension. This is the dimensions that you see in Bordeaux. Oh, sorry, not Bordeaux, in Burgundy. These are the dimensions you see in Burgundy of an appellation, to give you an idea. This is 53 hectares. It's a big vineyard. My parents pioneered Rylstone as a wine destination. There wasn't another winery in 50 kilometers when they first established themselves here. It was a very gutsy maneuver. Our family in Victoria thought we're completely nuts because their natural estimation is, well, why don't you start near us? We can share equipment. We can share capabilities and expertise. We can have emotional support groups together when we get hit by the inevitable hail, frost, rain, bushfires, heat, drought, too much of the negative. But we went out on our own. We're not on a cellar door trail. We're not. There's no way that anyone can drive their equipment to us to help us out. We're on our own. So the only way you can survive on your own is you get economies of scale. You have to be big enough to be able to afford everything, to do everything. And so that's why we planted 53 hectares all up, which is about just over 100,000 vines. Produces, if you were to make all of it under our own wine label, about 40,000 cases of wine. So quite a substantial development. And so that gave us the ability to bring in the best team. We've got amazing vineyard operations manager and support. It's enabled us to have the equipment we need to be able to invest in the quality, the dynamics. So this is an old photo. If you come out now, the way you can tell it's an old photo is the undervine areas are really clean and neat. They're no longer like that. That's old viticulture. This is about 6 years ago. The mid rows are now covered by green manure. So they look like it's a vegetable garden. Effectively, we've got turnips and things like that in the mid rows. We mow it down, but we don't spray. There's a reason. That's because you're trying to increase the organic matter to give food to the microorganisms that thrive in this environment. But what that size and that 40,000 cases also ended up with was my parents had no confidence that we'd produce the best wine, like great wines. Like we hoped to, but they hedged their bets for two reasons. One, it takes a long time for your vineyard to get to the age where it produces good wine. Two, there's no guarantees we're going to produce the best wine. And even though we want to do great Chardonnay and Pinot, in the 90s, Australia wasn't making Pinot really. It was making ABC Chardonnays, warm climate Chardonnays that were very buttery. Australia's reputation really at that stage was McLaren Vale or Coonawarra Cabernet, Barossa Shiraz, and Hunter Valley Semillon. So what did we plant? We planted Cabernet, we planted Merlot because we appreciated the Bordeaux nature and some Petit Verdot, but it's a blending variety. We planted Shiraz, we planted Viognier, Rhone Valley, as well as the Burgundian or the Champagne, Pinot and Chardonnay in this vineyard. That's why we're producing, that's why we're showing you Bordeaux varieties, even though our story to get here was much more Burgundy, the outcome, the varieties we planted were Bordeaux varieties as well as Rhone Valley. And as we grew them, as we saw the wines, the grapes that we sell, so we still sell about 75%, 70 to 75% of our fruit at the moment. That's diminishing every year. We'll probably be about 50%. We're up to almost probably 12,000 cases this year. As we saw the quality of the fruit coming off, we said, well, let's give it a go. And we made our first Cabernet in 2003. It's a very high vigor variety, gets onto the cordon quickly, it develops canopy quickly, and so it enables it to ripen fruit quickly. Whereas Pinot took us 2016, took us 18 years to get the same level of development to be happy with. So we had a lot of experience early with our Cabernets. That's why 2006, we got third best Cabernet in the world, very with young vines. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be replicated that much again easily, but it's an interesting spot. So as we've experimented, we've added more wines. That's why we produced 16 different wines, because we had the varieties planted, we trialed different things. So even though that chart and planting Cabernet on the coast and Merlot on the coast with and Chardonnay and Pinot inland, it's a great guide, but it's not always the rule book. I think there's some interesting discoveries from it. That's sort of, I guess, a little bit of I always play this bit of a joke. It's the route to Grand Cru, and it's a bit of a joke that we're 12,742 kilometers due down. So that's the diameter of the Earth. So what my parents were looking for, and why we weren't, we didn't end up in the Yarra or one of the other cool climate areas of Victoria. So we're starting, I guess the temperature was important. This is where I always, frustrates me when I hear Tasmania's cool climate, all you warm climate areas in the mainland. And we're like, no, you're not. It's like, you're as cold as Stanthorpe. Like Stanthorpe's up on the border with Queensland. Your benefit down here is latitude. The benefit up here is altitude. So if you've got high altitude down to latitude, you don't need as much altitude down here. The wide areas where it is cold, you want to stay clear of them. They're just too cold, the alpine areas. But zone 7 is effectively, that's France's climate. This is your temperature range, your degree days, or whatever you want to call it. So as long as you stay in that zone 7, you're cool climate, in my estimation. So there's quite a lot of it around, surprisingly, as you expect. And it's sort of, I try and show this to sort of unwind some of the stereotypes about mainland and also about New South Wales viticulture. We've got just as cool climates in New South Wales as they have in Tasmania. So been to Orange or Oberon recently, especially. Rylstone, we're the same. We're brutally cold. So we're the same temperature range as Champagne. We get -14 in winter. It's bloody cold. We're going to be we're -2 last night. Well, -1 last night. God, I hope not tonight because we're in bud burst. So yeah, we've got frost fans going and all sorts of shit going on now. It's a problem with cool climate. You get frost, and you get hail last week. Fortunately, not too much damage done. So, but for us, as you can see, Rylstone, right just west of Sydney, same temperature as Champagne and Burgundy, and similar temperature down here to Tassie. You can see the differential. Central Otago really gets cold. They overcome it using geography. They put them up in the slopes and the like, so above the frost lines and the like. That's what they're trying to do over there. But does indicate some of the cool climate areas. Even Orange there, you can see the temperature range as well. It's really bloody cold. But that doesn't, like cold climate, as you can see, there's a huge amount of area. Why we could have gone to Orange. So Orange makes magnificent wines. There's great wine industry there, great people. But we went to Rylstone, which was a sheep area. And the rationale behind it is that Pangea story we talked about with the Burgundy development. This is the Gondwana story. So this is 50 million years old. God, could give or take a couple of tens of millions of years. What's that in the scheme of things? At this time, the great supercontinent of Gondwana land, there was a barrier chain of volcanic islands off its east coast, and they held up the swells. So you had massive swells from the Panthalastic, the big oceans that were outside Gondwanaland. They landed on these volcanic islands. On the leeward side, you had a nice calm sea, and then you had the mainland of Gondwanaland. And along that leeward shore, the Gondwana facing shore of these volcanic islands became a teeming coral reef system that was thousands of kilometers long. The way to look at that is it laid down this layer of limestone that runs, and effectively just on the western side of the Blue Mountains. So the Blue Mountains were only 200 odd million years, so they came after this period of time. And you see this limestone, it's through Jenolan Caves, you see it in Wombian Caves, it's in various eras, but in terms of the generalities of it, but definitely Jenolan Caves, it's normally at depth because it's bloody old, it's been hidden, covered by, but in certain areas, it comes to surface. And you can see Rylstone here, where we are. There was a nice little coral reef, and we're right just behind that coral reef, De Beaupierre. That valley I showed you was effectively this zone, this big patch of limestone that was laid down. And as I said, you don't want it 10 meters at depth, you want it half a meter to a meter from surface. And the way you find limestone that's near the surface, one, is soil pH. So you can go around with a soil pH testing kit. And that has been done, to be honest. It's been done by old-timer miners, the old guys used to go up and down the rivers panning for gold and the like. It's also been done by companies that go and mine cement. So cement is limestone. It's crushed limestone. And right next to Rylstone, the twin town, they're called the twin towns. It's Rylstone and Candos. And Candos was the most famous cement mine probably in New South Wales of the last century. It built most of Sydney, especially all the big buildings that you're aware of around Sydney, the Harbour Bridge, for instance. A lot of the CBD architecture was Candos cement. And knowing it's cement, 40-kilogram bag of gold, we wouldn't be talking. I'd be having a great time in the Mediterranean on a big boat. It's not an expensive product, so it's got to be near the surface to mine it. You're not going to mine at a kilometre depth, so you need to mine at the surface. We knew this. We looked at Candos cement. We looked around the area, and we found that little valley, which you can sort of see it here. And this actually, the limestone comes to surface at this end, and it gradually comes and goes as you go through the property. We're obviously trying to move to precision viticulture, because that enables us to start running the vineyard on meter by meter basis, which will enable us to work much more closely with the subsoil, but at the moment, not possible. So that's effectively the background of why we were there. We found this area that produced this little area squeezed in between all these volcanic soils where the lava's come over the top, and these little areas where it just pops itself. The Candos quarry is just here on the map. That's about 1.5 kilometres again. So you can see it there. There's the pH. We don't need to go back to it. This is a better chart of it. So that gave us the high pH levels, similar situation. So it varies across our property from 6.9 to 8. So same thing. Sort of all these things are averages, but it's just a good way of demonstrating it by providing point by point data. So the last wine. So we talked Merlot. So Cabernet. Now, Cabernet is a relatively newcomer on Bordeaux, but also as a variety. It was a derivation. It's been evolved and grafted and husbanded through to its current variety. It's probably the most famous variety of Bordeaux nowadays. So the wines that are used Cabernet dominated are, besides Petrus, besides Le Pin, to be frank, the Cabernet varieties, your Rothschilds or Rothschild, the Latours, the Margots, and the like were Cabernets. And how did that all come about? So as I started, this is a bit more going back to the history of Merlot, just to break it all up. The Saint-Emilion, the blue areas are traditional Bordeaux. This is that clay layer, shallow soils, and the French, the English controlled these lands for a long time, and they maintained their control through commercial strength. To give you an idea how lucrative Bordeaux was as a territory of England or the English crown, on the right is one of the old streets of Bordeaux, but they all used to look like this. That is English stone. So effectively, so much wine was traded back to England that the ships would go up with wine and they'd come back consistently they'd empty themselves out. They wanted to go back semi-empty. So they'd load themselves up with English stone to give them ballast. They get to Bordeaux, they'd sell some of the stone, and and obviously there was enough stone to cobble all the streets of the bloody region. So it was a very lucrative era for England. That's why they wanted to retain it. That's why they're able to continue their wars with France, because of their holdings in Bordeaux. But they cornered the market. So they traders, so much so that like we make a rosé that I've based off one of the Grand Cru wineries in Bordeaux called Chateau Brown. That's a very French name, but it's Grand Cru. It's first growth with Chateau Brown. It was an English wine trader from the 1700s who established and owned it. So they traded and they dominated this. And around the 1600s, the Dutch were a little bit uppity and started, biting in and eating into the English trading zones. And you will have, if you've ever read the book Nathaniel's Nutmeg, one of the greatest trades of all time was the battle for the Nutmeg Islands, the Spice Islands in the East Indies, or in what is now Indonesia, and a little island called Rum. The Dutch East India Company, the English East India Company fought wars. They were allies in Europe, but they literally were killing each other with swords and muskets and cannons over this tiny little, like 2 kilometer long island, all for nutmeg trees. And the English ended up saying, you know what, Dutch, you can have it. They took a whole lot of plants, they planted them in India, which enabled them to grow nutmeg there. But they let the Dutch have this island. And they said, as payment for that, we'll trade this island for New Amsterdam. And the Dutch were like, yeah, fine, that's a great deal. Take New Amsterdam, we get the island of Rum. New Amsterdam is New York. It's why the old original families of New York are Dutch names. That's why they're English names, because it was a Dutch province. So they traded this out. Anyway, so this time, the Dutch and the English trading companies were really at each other. And the Dutch knew how lucrative the Bordeaux wine trade was. And they were like, well, we want to get in on it. But the English controlled all of the high ground, so to speak, and the Pomerol and Bordeaux Côte. And they were left looking around going, oh, what's left? And you got to remember, this was an era before forklifts and before trains. Everything was done literally, horsepower was by horse and by human hand. So you didn't want to have a really long logistics chain to your market. So the Dutch were looking around going, oh, so we want to trade it. And the land that might be here might be further back, might be further up the river so smaller boats, or further back inland. Oh, that's not going to work. Oh, what about all this swampy ground on the left bank? All of the swamps and the marshes, and what's the soil? What's it like there? I don't really care about the soil so much, but geez, I can get my barrels of wine right into a ship faster and easier and cheaper than the English, which means my prices are going to be better than the English. So what do? All this area, which is now called the Medoc, they effectively built dike systems that they just learned how to make in Holland themselves, drained the swamps, drained the marshes, and they've lifted a wine region out of the water effectively. And so it's why graves down here, parts of it were not with our gravels. They were, as you can imagine, a little bit different origination story. So the problem with wine, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. It's like everything, there's a rule and then there's not, and all rules are broken. And this is one of them. So we talk shallow soils, lack of water, intensity, concentration. This is marshlands and swamps. They're not going to be shallow soils. So this is the Dutch. They're looking around going, they tried to plant Merlot there. It didn't work. The Merlot skins burst. They went looking around for a variety, which was a thicker skin. You can see the soils here, gravelly, very deep, got limestone in them because obviously it's eroded down from the river systems around it. But they needed a variety that could handle a much more high moisture, high water content. And the way I like to think of it is, if you think of Pinot Noir and Merlot like a balloon, you fill them up too much, they pop. Really thick skin varieties like Cabernet are more like a jug. You give them a lot of water, after a while it just rejects it. It just doesn't matter. So we saw at this vintage where we got all that rainfall, that flooded Western Sydney. It happened literally the week before our Shiraz and Merlot harvest. ruined. We lost all of that fruit, burst and destroyed. Our Cabernet just bounced off it. Amazing Cabernet this year. And so this was the variety they settled on. And they effectively, to resolve a problem, they put Cabernet in. And now Cabernet is the most famous Bordeaux variety. And the reason why, as well, is it's to do with money. They made more money than the English did over the last 300 years, or these wineries made more money. They became more lucrative. The reinvestment became better in the techniques and the technology. They're very different vineyards to Burgundy, much bigger. And you see some of the best of them literally end at the river edge, and there's a jetty. So they would literally make the wine into a barrel, roll it onto a ship, and they'd outcompete the English. That was the Dutch. The first negociant, so that's the French term for a wine trader, normally who buys white label or unlabeled stuff, puts their own branding on it. For market, was called Bayerman. It was a Dutch firm, so not an English firm. So that was, I guess, that's what you can see here. Margot's 90% Cabernets and the like. Very expensive wines. So Cabernet handles a different soil type. It still wants the limestone soil. It still wants that alkalinity because it still imparts great subsoil biomes, but it's happier with a lot more water, a lot more depth, not stupid amounts of water. You don't want to put it in wet soils all the time, but you get disease anyway, and mildews and the like. But let's talk a little bit about the different types of Cabernet that you see around. So you've got your classic Australian, South Australian benchmark, the John Riddoch, Coonawarra Cabernet. Terra Rossa soils. Terra Rossa is limestone with a high iron content. That's why it goes red. So great wine. So what Coonawarra is, if you look at that chart, and I go back to it probably a little bit. So Coonawarra is pretty cold. So it's actually pretty decent temperature. It's about as close to Bordeaux as you can get. And it's probably explains a lot of why its reputation is so high. It's not on the coast. It's not as warm as the Barossa and the like. And it's a real benchmark variety. The Germans knew what they were doing when they established these regions down in South Australia. They just kept to themselves. They kept to themselves so much that they still speak German dialects in some of these towns. The next, so that's classic Bordeaux. So I think Wynns is probably closest in some respect. Well, not Wynns, but Coonawarra's semi-closest to it. The one that's really an interesting style, and I think it gives us more direction of what we're doing, is what Vaz Felix is doing. So Bordeaux, once again, the similarities that they talk about over there, not limestone, sandy soils, but they get that drainage level. Is Virginia Wilcox, probably one of the best winemakers in Australia. She explains it much better, but they've been trying to push it down. They're pushing a lot more of their vineyards down towards their new plantings down towards Great Southern, so towards Albany and Esperance. So the aim of what they're trying to do is they're trying to chase cooler climate. And there's a reason for that. And it has to do with tannin ripeness. I'll talk about it a little bit, but this is, Vaz Felix, I love Tom Colletti. I'd happily buy and drink any day of the week. And I think Virginia's a great, amazing winemaker. Really bloody well made, put together, and got some more cool climate characteristics that I'll talk about. You can see I've just put the other ones there, the French ones there to give you an idea of alcohol ranges and the like. Alcohol ranges really move around a lot, vintage to vintage. They will go up to 15%. It's interesting. I had some wine judge telling me that we made a 14.5%. It was too bloody. No, it's too high. I'm so fine in Australia. But I then showed him all of these French. I even showed Domaine Romani Conti, which was a 15% one year. He's like, oh, so yeah, mate, it's calm. It's how the alcohol holds itself is more important. Around the flavour and around the tannin, and with acidity is really important. So as you can see, the sort of mid-range acidity levels. Now, we have our Victor. So the 2006 was the one we came third in the world with. Very similar situation to the French over here. 16 Victor, made same sort of style. We have quite different Cabernets, and you'll see it and you'll taste it, probably tasting it now. You're having Le Marquis. So this is our non-reserve, still premium wine, but we're releasing it much faster. The way the reason we're able to do that, and you can look, is to do with tannin ripeness. So I guess I'll take me to the next slide, but if I can talk about a little bit more about the wine, we can come back to it, but maybe with this we'll talk about the wine in itself. So we said, so Cabernet has these stupidly thick skins. That was how I was able to plant the left bank and able to handle the marsh soils and the gravels and the deep rain, slow, the effectively old marshland. And what thick skins give you, not only is flavor, they give you tannin. So tannin, 101 course in tannin, it bonds proteins together. So saliva is protein dominated, so it's why it dries your palate out. It's great for breaking. I think probably the PhD can talk a little bit more about this, but Belinda's and Tracy looking up to do with I find that it breaks down proteins a lot more effectively. It's like a cat's tongue in the middle of the palate, opens up and makes food much more tasty. It also gives great longevity to wines. Problem is really the tannins aren't that enjoyable when they're underripe. So you can see here lower tannin wines, why they're much more enjoyable. Younger takes a little bit older. Malbecs, especially at Argentinian Malbecs, right out here on this end here, amazing wines. But a good 5 years and then it blows your mind away. 1 to 2 years, you'd be like, wow, it's a bit sharp. It's a little bit, not bitter is probably not the right word for it. The way I think of tannins, so tannins are polymers. All wines are effectively polymers. It's a living organism, a wine. It evolves, the acid and the esters interact together. A wine starts, the acid drops, esters become more dominant. So you go from a fruit flavor to more of those secondary characteristics, the leather, the chocolate, the eucalypt, the menthol in Cabernet. And why Cabernet? Normally, because it's got that really high tannin content, you've got to wait a couple of years. So what that means is that you're missing all of that fruit dominated flavor, and you're getting those ester dominated flavors, those secondary, those not tertiary flavors, but you're getting these other characteristics, which are great. Eucalypt and menthol are the key ones there in particular. But what we're finding is that tannins, as they ripen, they become. Start that again. Tannins start really, really small. So that's probably the best way of explaining it. The way I explain it best is I like to put it into really easy things as a parent, and as probably a bunch of parents here you've all dealt with Lego on the children's floor, or you've done it yourself, or whatever it is. You step on small pieces of Lego, it's sharp and it hurts. So that's young tannins, underripe tannins. They're short, they're sharp, not that enjoyable. So what you need is you either want time in the bottle, so they polymerize. So the way to really shortcut what polymerization is the Lego pieces get put together and they form nice smooth surfaces. And effectively, that's what you're talking about is that happens from time in bottle. So why Cabernets traditionally need quite a lot of time to go from here to here. But that's classic Cabernet. Coonawarra, most of the other Cabernets in Australia. The reason why Vaz Felix is chasing coming down south to Great Southern, the reason why we're Ralston, what we've discovered we didn't intend to discover it, is that we get an extra 30 days of hang time on the vine. So another month, these vines hang on the vines than these other areas. And that means the tannins start to polymerize on the vine while they're bunches of fruit. So you're actually harvesting and making wine from semi-resolved, partially smooth tannins already. So you accelerated the process to this smooth tannin outcome. The net result is you get these really lovely, that 2019 is really easy to drink. It's not sharp, it's smooth, it's called resolved, it's silky, velvety, plush, whatever you want to call resolved tannins. But they all, that you are looking at it in a young wine, which is very rare. And probably besides what Vaz Felix is chasing, what we have at Ralston from that extra hang time, you probably may be seeing it maybe in the Napa Valley, interestingly enough. They make similar comes across as a similar style, but it really produces this quite unique characteristic. So so you're having Le Marquis, bloody easy to drink out of 2-year-old wine, 2-year-old. And I released that in 2020 last year, and it's onto two hat this straight away by the glass. And they're all like, I can't believe this is only a year and a bit old for Cabernet. It's ridiculous. And that was that extra hang time. So that's what Vaz Felix is chasing, is that extra hang time, getting tannin ripeness It's unique for us as well. Different means a very fruit flavored wine, fruit dominated wine, but it does evolve into a classic Cabernet with time. If you were to have 2007, 2009, they taste much more like a classic great Cabernet that you're probably more familiar with because the acid's dropped and you're getting more of a normal Cabernet coming from it. But yeah, unique and different and special. So that sort of explains a little bit about the Cabernet. Ralston, I don't know if you've been, come up. It's beautiful area of the world. Obviously, when the borders reopen, keep the borders shut, but let us out of the house. Everyone come to Ralston. 3 hours from Sydney, probably about 2.5 hours from Western Sydney. It's getting closer every time they've got a new tunnel or bridge. And it's number 7 on the secret destinations in Australia. It's one of the oldest towns in New South Wales, so it's beautiful. Stone pubs, stone like beer gardens, beautiful stone streetscape. It's different to Orange and Mudgee. You know, we're 800 people. We're a village, not a town, so to speak. But I think that also gives it a bit of personality. It's a great drive if you do the Orange, Bathurst, Orange, Dubbo, Mudgee, Ralston route and spend a couple of days in each. It's great. It's different. Farm stays, pub stays. We're hopeful we'll be able to put some accommodation in sometime soon. It takes a long time to get approvals. But it's got a nice food and arts scene as well. A lot of artists have moved to our area, interestingly. The Candos, that mining town, when the mine was shut, the town went into a tailspin. The house prices got very cheap. And that attracted in artists, interestingly enough. And a lot of them relocated. So there's this thriving art community across the two towns. And we've got some amazing shops for selling local produce. So come up. It's beautiful. We'd love to see you. And if you feel, the need to buy any wine, I know lockdown is coming to the end. Hopefully you'll come up physically. But if you need any wine in the meantime, 20% off all orders if you like. We don't do bottle shops, so direct is our only way. If it's not at the cellar door, so you're welcome to it. I will PDF this presentation. I'll send it to you guys so you don't have to take a photo. Or email me personally. I'm happy to have a chat. So that was sort of I've talked a lot without a break. I'm sorry. No, I normally sometimes I get groups where they get someone who's really will stop. I want to ask something. I know hopefully you found it enjoyable. What are your thoughts of the wines that you've sort of gone through? What was the I guess the gut feel behind it? So
I really liked the Merlot.
Yeah.
Bring it back into fashion.
Oh, we are. My Queensland manager is he used to run Urbane restaurant. He's the general manager of Urbane. I don't know if you've been to Urbane. Was the number 1 restaurant in Brisbane for 12 years. It was 3 hats. And before that he was Ari at GM. And he's like, mate, this is my favorite wine. And people just, it's just an easy, I drink it. My wine here is because it's enjoyable. It's like, sometimes I feel wines, you got to push yourself to enjoy them. I'm like, what's the point? I've only got so many glasses left. I want to enjoy them. So Merlot for you, what was everyone else? Was there any surprises?
I'm thinking white. I haven't tried the reds.
Robin, you've got the weekend.
Steve has.
What did the birthday boy think? Is Steve? So you've left Steve to have 2 bottles of wine. So he actually isn't there anymore. I can't see him. Or there he is.
No, I'm still here.
Yeah, well done, mate.
I quite like it.
Favorite.
What was your favorite, or what was
did you like?
Well,
I quite like the white.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Semillon's people think it's a quaffer. We got 93 points for it. I'm like a bit blown away. We didn't put that into win.
This isn't a Semillon, is it?
We've been to Bordeaux. We quite like the Sauterne. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, we make a Petrita Semillon. Exact, very so oh gosh, what's the name? So one of my good mates, who's a Frenchman, he's good friends with the general manager of Chateau de Cam and gave her a couple of bottles, so she was a bit of a fan herself. So yes, our Petrita Semillon is very high. It's the same acidity levels, so it's the same aperitif style, and more so than dessert style. So you're looking for that once again, acid, salty, savory. So great with the terrines, the foie gras, the pâtés, blue cheeses. Yeah, very much similar. Very similar.
And so why don't you call it Sauterne? Is that a French thing, is it?
It's a region, so you can't call any wine after a French region. So we used to call them Sauternes. So we used to have Burgundies that were made in the Hunter Valley, which were mainly Shiraz. We used to have Bordeaux and Claret, and we've had to drop all of those because they're all French appellation or controlled names. So yeah,
I'll have to give one a crack when I get a chance.
Yeah, do. Well, yeah, that was the one we won best wine in Australia. So it was the first time in 40 years a sweet wine's ever won that trophy. So yeah, it was. I make a cute little Botrytis Viognier as well, which is Northern Rhone Valley. Much more floral, same high, stupidly high acid levels. So I don't know if you've ever been to Biota, but Ben Shepherd, who was there as a Solomon manager, used to put it with cured meats because of the really high acid load was great with the salt in the cured meats, but also the high acid, the high fat content. It was that's what great soms are. Isn't so much so you go, I'll have the foie gras with the Sauterne, which is an obvious, well documented match. It's the surprising ones where you walk in and go, wow, cured meat and a sweet wine. And oh wow, this works. So how the hell did that happen? So yeah, strongly recommend it. If you get, we're out of it. 2019, we're pretty much out. 2020, we made a lot, but we got damage, so we couldn't rescue it, unfortunately, which is a real shame. 2021 this year, because of that rain and the like, probably our best sweet year, I think, ever. So the way it's looking. So our hope is that we'll produce something to rival the 2016, which won all those trophies, and we'll hopefully release it around Christmas, New Year. We're trying to extend its time in oak as much as possible, but we need to produce some because I've got clients all around the world clamoring for it. So we're about to start stocking French restaurants in France. So we do a lot in Singapore, doing Philippines. So yeah, word is spreading. We're the wine partner of Tourism France, which sort of gives you an idea, I guess. Well, I won't be doing many ambassadorial dinners at the moment. they're off the cards until the ambassador comes back. But yeah.
Don't sell them any submarines, for God's sake.
I know. I know. I spoke to my French friends. You're a bit like, I'm pretty embarrassed. Like, look, I've got mates in the Navy. I'm all up on the capabilities and what we need. It's just, I don't know. Still, I would maybe prefer a more diplomatic treatment of one of our oldest allies, but
Will, are there any? So Derek and I, we just purchased like a camper van earlier this year.
Oh, did you?
Yes. We sort of settled on, would be see more of Australia. Are there any good
camp areas?
Where you can.
Yes. So in our area, there's two. There's the the Nagels. It's got a oh God, sorry, my brain's just had a.
We need a hot tip from a local.
Yeah, no. Why have I just forgotten? That's terrible. Oh gosh,
It's the big four.
it's like when the
Wiki camps.
What's that? Here we go. Sorry, this is where. Oh my God, I've forgotten the name of their bloody farm. They're like some of our closest friends. It's Old Barra, is one. So it's they have a beautiful steak property. They have a beautiful. they graze the most beautiful cattle up there, and they've got a beautiful campground that they have. It's quite large and expansive. Is one option. The other one is Cape Valley, or you could do two. So you'll get a farming option at Old Barrow, at top of the Cape so Darley's campground. You got those sheer cliffs, the box canyon that's around the Cape, which rivals Walgan Valley, if you like Walgan Valley or that type of, it's the biggest box canyon in the world. So you get that, and then you've got I've got Turon Gates as well, which I don't know if you can take your camper van there, which is which is like you could actually spend a week just jumping around to these different campgrounds just in our area. Turon Gates, they've got horse riding. It's much more, it's got a very family, there's a lot of family activity. It's been around for 40 years, fishing, horse riding, and the like. So Darley's for the splendor of these mountains. Steve's a legend as well. And then Old Barra, they're just lovely people, and Sally and
Old Barra.
Old Barra.
Okay. I've written it down.
Put that on your list, Kylie.
Yeah, totally.
And
Hashtag family.
they're upmarket too. You're not going to be dealing with out of control drunks or anything like that. Like they're pretty well controlled. Yeah, it's funny. I was about to say, I was chatting to a person today, and I was saying, I was chatting to an anaesthetist for who's an emergency at St. Vincent's a couple of weeks ago. He's like, oh, we can't wait to get out. Can't wait to get out. I don't care the fact that it's probably going to mean ER is going to fill up with drunken injuries again. And we're laughing. And the joke was, I was chatting today is it's probably going to be a bunch of 40-plus-year-olds who are going to be doing stupid things, reliving our 20-year-old, 20 life for the next couple of weeks. Kids can look after themselves and make us dinner for once. Is sort of the attitude I seem to hear. So, yeah. So maybe the world behaves and the campgrounds might be a bit different. But the average age of these campgrounds normally is 40s plus. So, okay. But
Thanks.
hope that helped. Hey, I'll actually write them in the chat. I don't know if you, Old Barra, Charlie.
Oh yeah, because then I can get the spelling right.
Yeah. They're all in our area and they're all magnificent. And I'd actually recommend spending a couple of days in each, and you'll get a different experience in each. And there's a lot of bushwalks and just there's natural beauty in spades. So we're right up against the national parks, Rylstone area and Woolamai National Park. That's why bushfires were such a big issue for us. And a lot of this area got burnt pretty badly. But there's some magnificent natural features in the area. Like one's Gangutty. If you get the chance, it's probably one of the most beautiful. It's a water lake system. It's right up in the mountains, and you effectively you can hire kayaks and stand-up paddle boards, and you paddle literally between cliffs. It's a couple of kilometers long. It's almost spiritual. You sort of drive up this box canyon, and the road gets down to 1 car width, and you sort of go up through this sort of cutting, and then it opens up into this area, and it's like the whole environment's different. The trees are different, and yeah, it's definitely got religious significance, I'm sure. And walk out into it, and yeah, it's just amazing. And lovely people who run the kayaks. They used to do these twilight cruises. I wonder if they'll put them back on again. Used to do sparkling and a twilight cruise on the swamp.
We went to a great dumpling restaurant.
Yes.
In town. Is that still there?
It's definitely still there. So that's $29,999. So that you would have met Nalan, probably not Reg, so her husband. So Nalan's from Xi'an in China. So she was a producer in China TV, and Reg is an Aussie, and he was the art director of one of the big advertising agencies in China, and they met during the day at a meeting. Oh, he looks cute. She looks cute, blah, blah. We're never going to see each other as Beijing, I think. And it's too many people here. And that night, they were at the same party, and they're like, oh, it's had to be. And so they obviously fell in love and got married. And she always wanted to live out in an isolated area away from lots of people. So being both artists cheers, Callum. Cheers, Matt. Actually, 1 second. Let me just put my PDF up if you get the chance, or email me. Sorry, I should have saved. There we go. And save as PDF. Otherwise, email me and I can send it to you.
Sorry, Will, can you put your email up again as well?
Yeah. I'll write it here. But when I put up the when I give you the presentation, it's on the final page. Okay, there we are. Google your computer. Sorry about this. There we are. Okay, I'm just uploading it now. So when it comes to you, just hang around to download it. Yesterday they married, and they came out to paint, effectively to do art. So she's an amazing lithographer. So with the I don't know if you've stunning sort of. It's where you do the pinpoint through the leather or whatever, the pinpoint drawings, and it's beautiful. They take incredibly long periods of time. And they realized that, you know, there was no cash coming in for a period of time. So she's like, well, how about we make some dumplings to make some money? And so they established a small little dumpling shop at the end of Rylstone. It took off. I think Gourmet Traveller rated the best regional yum cha in Australia. And now you speak to Nalan, she's like, I don't have any time to paint. It's like the whole reason to be here was to be an artist. And now I'm running a restaurant. So, but her mum's down, I think. Her mum's down now because it was her recipes and she's making the dumplings. And so I think Nalan's getting a bit of time. Reg, you won't never find there, but he's like, it's a black hole. I go there, I'm put to work, whereas he's out in his bush cabin painting, and he's incredibly creative. It's fascinating. I call Rylstone country light. It's beautiful, obviously environmentally. There's a lot of obviously artists. We've got baristas, we've got cafes and yoga, and we do debate nights and art theory evenings. There's a film club where they all go watch old films in various areas, and like up in the valleys and random locations. And so yeah, it's a nice area of the world. We're very lucky. So,
Well, the other experience was that restaurant in the golf club that's run by a few volunteers or something, and they only do it 2 nights a week. And
yep,
you know, you get real typical pub grub.
That's right.
At the golf club, it was really good too. We had a good night there.
Well, the golf clubs, so that was Candos Golf Club. So that was
Was it? It's the one that's near the. There's a.
Oh, Rylstone. Oh no, you're talking about Tina. Okay, no, they're lovely. She makes pizzas and everything now. I was talking about over at Candos Golf Club. I'm like, I don't know if they make food, but
I don't think we went to Candos. I think it was it's the one that's near the hotel motel.
Yeah,
the motel block, and you just walk down to the.
Oh yeah, that's Candos Golf Club over out of Rylstone. You drive out of Rylstone a couple of kilometres and a half, 2 kilometres to Candos. You don't get into Candos. It's on the.
I don't know.
There's the Rylstone Club, which is great for a bit of a feed too. The Globe Hotel is pick of the pubs in town, so it's making Paul, who's taken over he's like a 30-something licensee. So he had a restaurant in Darlinghurst before it called Butter, which was quite well known for a lot of, especially media people used to go there. But he's originally a country boy and he's always wanted to go back to the country and run a pub. So he's got a big vision of turning it into a gastro pub, and he's been putting a lot of extra effort in. He's got vegetable gardens now at the back. He's got a huge beer garden. He's got beer festivals and much more live music. It's always been there, but he's wanting to put a distillery and a brewery in, and so that's driving that forward. But the Candos Golf Club, it was the mining. It was one of the mine at Candos had 2 golf clubs. One was destroyed, obviously reclaimed. It was, but the Candos Golf Club was kept intact. It shows the wealth that Candos used to have, because they brought in the guy who built Royal Queensland, Elanora Country Club, and that was the guy who built the course. So it's a country club. It's like it's a country course with dog legs down and onto a green. And you're like, are you seriously? It's not Moonar Links or the Australian level, because it's 1950s or 1940s, 1930s probably course design, or 1930s or 20s course design. But it's pretty handy, and it's, as you've indicated, it's maintained by an army of volunteers, all the old retired mine workers in the area. They all effectively adopt a hole and they look after it. It does need some money on bunkers, and probably the greens need to be redone. But, as far as bush courses go, it's pretty bloody good. And if it's rained a lot, which it has, the fairways are in awesome nick. So, yeah, strongly recommend it. But, yeah, that's it.
New plan, Rylstone for Christmas.
Yeah. Well, it's in the mountains. Yeah. Just
joking.
Just make sure you go for a swim at Gangutty. So they'll cool you down. That's where we all go for a swim in summer. So it used to be called Dunn Swamp. So and one of the old time locals was like, I like it being called Dunn Swamp because it keeps the tourists away. Was his explanation. So Gangutty is a traditional name, and we do want the tourists to come, because that's the point.
Well, on that note, I mean, is there some sort of a tourist trail? Because I know maybe 18 months ago or 12 months ago at least, NRMA were putting out these, go on a road trip, and they were doing these itineraries around New South Wales.
Yep.
Is there anything, I mean, not by NRMA, but maybe on a more grassroots level, is there like a tour of your region?
Absolutely. There's a couple of different things to go on. One, we have our own little tour guide for our micro area, which I'll just put the link up there. There are a couple of different road trips. So Orange Tourism, actually Orange 360 has some good data on it. They actually put together road drives.
I follow them too. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, they're Nicole and Tom and the guys who run Orange 360 are very close mates. Well, not close, but they're good mates of mine. And they've been talking about it as that's the future of tourism. Like we've all got to work together. I had a lot of mates last in the lockdown who came out and they did the Bathurst, Orange, Dubbo, Western Plains Zoo with their kids, then Mudgee for a night, and then Ralston for 2 nights because all mates there. They effectively managed to get a babysitter in every location and went to the town and got pissed every night. They said it was one of the best holidays they'd ever had. So that's definitely something which you can do that loop around. The other one is you come our way and you do there's obviously Lura and Katoomba are halfway between Sydney and Ralston. So you can stop there, then you go to Ralston, then you drive Bylong Valley Way. So Bylong Valley Way is one of the top 10 driving roads in Australia, and it takes you down to the Hunter Valley. So it's beautiful. You're driving, it's magnificent countryside, and you drive down to the Hunter, and then you're in the Hunter Valley. So then you spend a couple of nights in the Hunter, and then you go to Newcastle and go down the F3 freeway. So a lot of motorbike enthusiasts do that. We get a lot of motorbikers in the area. It's funny. Sometimes you're like, oh, the Comancheros are here, and then you realise no, it's the Ulysses Club or whatever. It's the retirees on bikes, which is great because they spend money and they love the area. But they've all got the gear, they've all got the Harleys, but they love it because that ride down the Bylong Valley, it's the same. Like it's like the Kapiti Valley, Walgan Valley, Bylong Valley are all similar. Like they're all got these magical sort of flat floors and then really sheer cliffs for most of their length. So so Bylong Valley you do, yeah. But obviously Katoomba and Lura are halfway. So it breaks the trip down an hour and a half there. Stop there for lunch or for the night. Stay at the Carrington or somewhere like that, and then or the Fairmont, and then continue on. It's there's quite a lot to do. I'm just trying to. Our travel guide there has got a bit, but Orange 360's got a bit. Otherwise, yeah, Katoomba, Lura, part way, Wentworth Falls area, Lura. I've said that. You can then, rather than go west, you can just come to us and then go east back to the ocean. So, which is fun.
What's your favourite wineries in Orange?
Whoa.
Dale's from Orange. That's the
Loaded question.
Oh, there's.
I'm forced to go there every year.
That's such a struggle. I feel so sorry for you being forced to go to Orange.
I know.
It's an awesome town. Like we had our New South Wales, New South Wales wine board. Sit on the New South Wales wine board, and we had one of our board meetings there 6 months ago, and it was great. We all went out to town. Oh God, yeah, and one of the guys that was trying to find churro, something at the end of the night. I can't remember. He was yelling, "I'm off to find something." But as a town, there's great restaurants, wines. Oh, I'm always hesitant about giving too much away because it's like it's like a validation for some and an attraction for others. I think I've got my friends are obviously Rowley. I've got Swinging Bridge, are mates of mine. I was on the phone this morning.
Oh yeah, Rowley's good. Yeah.
Yeah, Nicole and her husband are awesome. Philip Shaw was on the phone with Philip Shaw. What's the son's name? This morning, and I sent another call with the Garretts, who are lovely. Like there's some Orange has really got it together. Like they're the benchmark for regional tourism at the moment. It's interesting. So Tom and Nicole put Ralston now on their little driving maps because they're friends. I'm like, well, you've got a Ralston too. They originally said, oh, we'll send people to Mudgee. I'm like, no, we're Ralston, not Mudgee. But it's quite interesting. Mudgee originally took us and said, oh, Mudgee Wine was like, yeah, Ralston's part of us. Like we're 50 kilometers away. Rylstone, and our town's very proud of that fact that we are a Rylstone town. But the benchmark that you guys have out there is phenomenal. Like they wish, everyone was as professional and well run as them. And what's great though is, as I said, these driving tours that they're doing are bringing people out, and everyone's benefiting from it. So it's fascinating. I think something like 90% of people who came out after the last lockdown to our general region had never come out our way. Not talking to Rylstone, we're talking Mudgee, Orange. It's phenomenal, the number of people, and the number of people we had coming in going, we've never come west of the Blue Mountains. This is incredible. Like we've only ever done the Hunter Valley. And they're like, well, for another extra half an hour, you now get all these other wine regions. And to be frank, like the Hunter's good, but it's very mining dominated now, and towns are, they're nice. There's a lot of tourism infrastructure which helps, but you got to Orange, you got to Mudgee, you got to Rylstone. It was built when mining was rich, and so the towns are stunning, like Georgian architecture, grand town halls, big wide open streets, stone pubs. Like it's idyllic. That's why housing prices are going bananas. and I don't know. I bet you're probably going, I wish I'd bought that house for 300 grand in Orange, like 8 years ago, because it's now probably 1.5 or 1.2 or something crazy. But these are the towns which they think will benefit the most from some of the shifts, because they are, you can go from Paddington in Wallara or Balmain and Sydney and be just as happy in Orange, or maybe there's enough food, there's enough beauty, enough sophistication to, you're not ducking behind a wire screen while the crowd's throwing beer
Too many
bottles.
relatives, though.
I don't
Many
think there's enough
relatives.
sophistication. I
Well,
think you're wrong there.
Pardon? Sorry?
You're
What was that?
rude,
What was that,
Carly.
Belinda?
I don't think there's enough sophistication. Rylstone sounds much more sophisticated. Dumplings.
Yeah, dumplings, our little art galleries,
Oh,
debating nights.
That's because you've only been out with us in Orange.
Crepe lady that in Rylstone.
Well,
Is
we're
that still there? The crepe lady.
the grape lady. Which one?
There's a
Rylstone?
crepe place.
Oh, crepes. Sorry, crepe. I'm like,
Yeah.
you say crepe or crepes or grapes or she's
Pancake.
moved across. Where's she gone? Oh, she's lovely. She's Dutch. The Dutch crepes.
The Dutch lady, yeah.
Yeah, she's just relocated. I don't know where everyone is at the moment, because everything's obviously been in the air with the lockdowns. I'm trying to remember what. Yeah, she's lovely. She's so cool. I love those crepes. There's just so did Megan, my other half. It was effectively chocolate. There's a lot of chocolate in a crepe. I'm hungover chocolate crepe. But it's right next to the Anything Emporium, which is a must if you go to Rylstone. It's all local artists, and you also got to go to Folkology at the other. Like there's a whole lot of things on that travel guide I put there, but Folkology at the other end of the street's phenomenal. Like Kim and Carol have done that. Like it's interesting. Kim was a world leading Valenza, so white window display designer. So she's done Milan, London, New York, and so that's Carol. I think her name's right. That's Carol. And then Kim was a sheep farmer, and from out further west. And they fell in love, and they were like, oh, let's pick somewhere halfway between you and me. And Rylstone was halfway. And Kim had enough being a sheep farmer, and he is incredibly talented as a cabinet maker. He makes the most amazing furniture, and he makes it from recovered woods and other furniture. And so Carol's like, great. So what we'll do is we'll get a shop which you can demonstrate your wares. And as she's got there now, it's like, well, let's make the shop look prettier, and let's do it. And it's just stunning. So it's lovely. It's set a really high benchmark for furniture and little homewares, and it's all regional stuff as well. So it's a real shop small and local town.
Is there any relationship to the tyre sort of Yangate in your family?
Yes, there is.
Oh, repair. Yeah.
So it's the French have been good with tyres. Take Michelin. So it's one they're good with rubber. I don't know why. I don't know if that means, but we were in tyres when we first came to Australia. Correct. And we got out of it in the 70s. So we sold it to Dunlop as a family. Well, I had nothing to do with it. My dad had no intention of doing it. My grandfather regrets, I think, getting involved in it, to be honest, when he was around. He was very creative. He wanted to be in advertising and go off to the United States and do all these bits and pieces, but he was sort of put upon to go into the tire company, which was well. But yeah, no, it was a great business, what was built by those guys. They built it, most of its expansion was in the Great Depression as well, which gives you an idea of, you know, hard times. You can still build stuff. And he was a bit of a visionary. So Frank, but there was all my great grandfather, my other great grandfather. There were three of them involved. Frank was just the front man, and one of my other great grandfathers was one of the other guys, and then one of the other guys was their cousin. Actually, no, it was their brother-in-law, who's my great grandmother's brother. So it's all sounds a bit wrong, but it's right. Don't worry, no one was related to me, but they were. Yeah, it was a
No, but what it sounds like is a great family history of creating or making things or manufacturing, but that story where your family went to Ralston as opposed to, you know, the Yarra Valley, you are creating something new again, even though it was, you know, 23 years ago or 24 years ago.
100%. I look at it. There's definitely some role models, you know, the stories, you know, the family. Like, you know, my great grandfather, they built the Sunshine Harvester, so in Sunshine in Victoria, the Mackays, HP Mackay. And, so it was his son, who was the brother-in-law of Frank Beaurepaire and my other great grandfather Bob Cuthbertson. They married the sisters of him, there was a lot of entrepreneurial activity in the family and a lot of country origin stuff and a lot of perseverance. It's just, but that's what you got to have to be in wine. To be honest, this is a bloody tough industry, and it's never been harder. I think the last 3 years, we've had frost. We had a killer frost 5 years ago. We lost everything, and we had bushfires, which destroyed everything. We had a drought, which cut yields. We've had more frost last year. We've had COVID. So yeah, it's, you know, you got to be halfway crazy, and the other half you got to be pig-headed and stubborn like an ox. So that's sort of seems to be the DNA of success, just holding on, luck and holding on. So,
Possibly rich.
well, wine is not the pathway then. It's great. It's great for turning riches into none. How do you make $1 million in the wine industry? You put 10 in or whatever it is. So yeah. So yeah, look, it's there is a lot of rich people in our industry who are stupidly rich, who got a lot of money, you know, but they're learning that money doesn't buy you everything in the wine industry. It's a lot more has to do with passion, and a lot more has to do with, you know, the terroir. And if you planted the vineyard in the wrong spot, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to be able to replicate it. So that's sort of it's my 101 for a lot of people who are going in with a lot of money is one, probably don't. Just give me $1 million. We'll go for a year traveling the world. We'll have a ball, have more fun than the wine industry, and just spend the rest of your life buying wine, or that's it. But if you've got the passion and
Spend the money on that, yeah.
But if you've got the passion and, you know, this is an industry that rewards passion and, you know, persistence and innovation and ingenuity, and you've got to do something to stand out. So yeah. So my standing out is I've got no hair. That's my original thought. So it's a great way. Well, you know, we're designed to save the world on Christmas Eve in a high-rise building. That's what I say to everyone. I'm just waiting for a high-rise building, Hans Gruber, and I will have found my time and my calling. So you know what I'm talking about. You're laughing. Everyone else is like, what is going on? So it's all right. That'll be our inside joke. One hairless man to another.
Not a Christmas movie.
Pardon?
I said it's not a Christmas movie.
Well, it's one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time, especially for us men who are hair challenged. So just go look up Hans Gruber, High Rise, Nakatomo Towers, and
good on you.
You'll find it. I think the greatest directed video movies of all time, I think it was. So anyway, but I'm off segue, guys. This was lovely. I happy to, if you've got any more questions or chat, more than happy to. You've got my email. Email me. My sister or my dad will be at the cellar door with my mum, the dogs, I'll be there a bit too. Yeah, please spread the word. We'd love to see you guys, and and we'll be planning on continuing these in some shape or form. I think going forward, I think these are, especially cost-wise, if there was 4 or 6 of you with the 3 bottles, you'd probably be opening all of them. And I think that.
Do you do Rotary clubs?
If they book, if on this type of night, are you talking, or in Celador this time of night?
Yeah, somebody was interested today.
I'm doing
Rotary clubs.
I'm doing a group of 12. I've done a couple of corporates, 12 people, 15 people, 16 people. Great for team building at the moment. Everyone's sitting at home. So they all get together. And I did a telecommunications company the other week, and doing Boston Consulting Group next Wednesday night. So there's quite a few, quite a few.
Okay.
Quite a few different.
I'll tell my friend.
But happy to. You got my email. Have a chat, so we can tailor something. And was out my view, and this is probably why I'm not allowed to sell it all, because I've talked for 2.5 hours. it is proselytizing. Like we're the great guys, the great companies in the wine industry are those who tell their story the best, and it's not always the best one, to be honest. But if you've got good wine and you've got the ability to communicate it and proselytize, not prostitute, probably actually a bit of both, to be honest, then you cut through. And I was lucky, the people who have influenced me have been very much of that strain. So they're eccentric, they're crazy. They're not Gary Osborne eccentric. So but they're definitely big personalities, and that's been when there's 10,500 Australian wines and 1,500 competitors, who are domestic, let alone international, and let alone everything. The home brands that Woolworths and Coles are building these days. You got to be different. So I'm just looking for that Nakatomi Towers. So
okay, thank you so much.
No one's getting it. It's Die Hard. The Die Hard was the Nakatomi Towers. Yeah, you're like, yeah, I know. How can they not know this? It's like our hero, Bruce Willis. Like, no hair.
He knows it. He's totally
It's just us 3 and Jason Statham, mate. We'll be fine.
Jason Statham. Absolutely. We can save the world in a tower, and we can get away in good cars, looking good doing it. So I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Please, if I see you, please come up and say hi if you ever see me. And thank you. Thanks for putting up with me talking.
Oh, yes,
Yes, Will.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Happy birthday, Steve. Glad you hung around.
Sorry.
We'll see you over summer.
Okay.
Absolutely. We look forward to it. We look forward to it. Cheers,
Okay.
guys.
Radio. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
birthday.
Happy birthday too.
Happy birthday, Mr. Ford.
He's going to sit in a comfortable chair.